gold was money, it took many thousands of years to become monetized and everyone to use it as base money. But Bitcoin, this is happening in the space of decades. For Bitcoin to achieve the same market capitalization of gold, I think it could easily surpass it. But if it was to reach the same market capitalization of gold, Bitcoin would have a price of about $1 million per Bitcoin. To me, that's the most obvious bullish case. Big bull case for Bitcoin is it becomes the global reserve currency. It replaces the dollar as the reserve currency, and the nation states are holding Bitcoin in reserve. Nation states don't want to lose the sovereign power of controlling money. So I think while they may adopt Bitcoin as a store of value, I think they will continue to make it hard to use it as a medium of exchange because they want that control. I'm less worried if a company is creating real value and using that to buy Bitcoin. Like they're building some product and they're using the profit and putting it in Bitcoin. But if the only thing they're doing is financial engineering, selling their shares to use it to buy more Bitcoin, that's not a sustainable thing in the long term.
Give us some overview of who you are, how do you came to Bitcoin, and why you are excited about Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Vijay Boyapati. I'm originally from Australia. I came to the US to do a PhD in computer science. Didn't end up doing that. Ended up getting a job at a small company called Google. And now it's much bigger than when I joined. And then I left Google in 2007 to do some political campaigning for a presidential candidate, Ron Paul. And he was talking about a message that was, I thought, really important that no one else was talking about, which was the importance of sound money. And so that's something I've been interested in even before I knew about Bitcoin, was the importance of sound money. And that campaign didn't really go anywhere, which was really disappointing for me. And I sort of started to understand the political process is really controlled by some very powerful interests. And I realized I just wanted to go back to tech. I didn't think I could have much impact in the political world. And then in 2011, I came across Bitcoin. And the way I came across it was that I had a friend and I had a bet with each other about Federal Reserve policy. And the bet was for one silver coin. The winner would get one silver coin, 1 ounce of silver. And I won the bet. And my friend said, well, there's this other thing. Let me pay you. Don't take silver. I want to pay you in this other thing. It's called Bitcoin. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he made me download the core software on my little laptop and download the blockchain. And my laptop started getting really hot because it was verifying all the transactions. And I didn't know what was going on. And he said, okay, now I'm going to show you how to create an address. And he created an address. And he sent me one silver coin at the time was worth $50. He sent me $50 of Bitcoin, which was five Bitcoins at the time. And he said, look, I sent you 5 Bitcoin. And he showed me on a very primitive block explorer. You know, he had sent me the Bitcoin and I didn't understand anything. It was just like letters and numbers and it seemed kind of weird and crazy. And I said, okay. And I forgot about it. And I actually gave that laptop to my ex-girlfriend and she lost it. So my first 5 Bitcoins are dead. And you can see they have never moved on the blockchain. So they're really dead. So that's how I got into Bitcoin. And then after a little bit, I became very interested in like, why does Bitcoin have any value? Because I was interested in the ideas around sound money and gold and why gold had been money. And I actually had spent a lot of time thinking about why does gold have value? And so when I came across Bitcoin, I was like, this is kind of like money. This is a form of money. But this is different to gold. This was created out of thin air. It's not a physical thing. And so I became really obsessed with this question and spent many years trying to think about it. And eventually in 2017, I think my thoughts had crystallized and I wrote an article called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. And it was mostly meant for friends and family. But it got read a lot more than I expected, over 1 million times. And it was translated into 20 languages by volunteers. And that kind of eventually spurred the writing of my book, also called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. And I've just been really interested since 2011 in I think one of the most important economic questions of our time. Why does this have any value, and why is its value continuing to rise, fairly steadily since it was created? Uh, I think this economic question is probably the most important economic question that's available to anyone interested in economics, because what we're witnessing is the creation of a new global money. And no one has ever seen this happen in real time. When gold was money, it took many thousands of years to become monetized and everyone to use it as base money. But Bitcoin, this is happening in the space of decades. And so we can be alive and witness this happening in real time. And I think it's incredibly interesting and fascinating. So that's how I got into Bitcoin. So I'll let you interrupt. I've gone on a long sort of tangent here.
I always love tangents. My record was 55 minutes, not interrupting the guest, but it's really interesting because when we have the perspective and zoom out, kind of, we are now 16 years into Bitcoin, 16, 15, 17, something like that. And how long it took for gold to be like a medium of exchange and be kind of like actual money. I already earn a lot of my proportions of Bitcoin, a lot of proportions of money directly in Bitcoin, and I spend even some directly in money. So some directly in Bitcoin. So it's kind of interesting that I, in 2025, can use on a daily basis a money that hasn't been around for more than 16 years. It went so quickly. I want to, before we get in those things, I'm really interested how you, coming from Silicon Valley tech and even like political view, like really an interesting background. How has this shaped kind of your initial view of Bitcoin and how you got it? With Ron Ball and with probably the connection with gold was really influential in your early understandings of Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was most exciting to me was that there's a way to change the world through technology. Because I feel like the political process in America and much of the world is really broken. People don't feel like they can change the system. The system has this inevitability to it, and it's controlled by very powerful interests. But if you're able to upend the system through technology, that's great, especially if you're a technologist. You can make the world a better place uh, by creating something. And that's what got me most excited about Bitcoin. I think also from the economic side of things, I saw very strong similarities with gold. And I saw this potential in Bitcoin to be better than gold. To me, Bitcoin was gold with teleportation built in. I could teleport value to someone on the other side of the world. And I like to tell this story. When I was a kid, my dad, my mother got sick, and my dad was worried that she might die. She survived, thankfully, and she's still with us. But he wanted to move all his assets back to India. And my sister and I grew up in Australia. So my dad had houses and he sold all his houses, but there was no easy way to get that value to India because India at the time in the 90s didn't have a functioning banking system. So how did he get his value to India? He sold his assets in Australia and he bought gold. He bought gold bars. And I remember flying on a plane with my dad and he had all of his wealth in a bag in gold bars. And I remember the stress that he felt carrying his wealth. Anyone could have taken that bag, or going through customs in India is very corrupt. They could have snatched it from him and taken it from him. But eventually he managed to get his savings over to India by just transporting gold. So when I came across Bitcoin, I realized immediately that he would never have had that problem if he had Bitcoin. He could have just transmitted that value over to someone in India if he wanted to buy something in India. And he would never have had the stress of transporting his wealth physically in a bag through an airport and on a plane and then getting to India through customs. And that is incredibly valuable, to be able to have full sovereignty over your savings and to send those savings wherever you want without anyone's permission is one of Bitcoin's value propositions. It has twin value propositions. One, is that you have full control over your savings and you can send them anywhere without anyone's permission. And the other pillar is that your savings are free of debasement. No one can debase your savings. And this is very different to fiat monies where your money can be debased by the political process. So together, those two twin pillars of Bitcoin's value proposition make Bitcoin very, very powerful. And I think when I came across Bitcoin, I realized, hey, this has all of the great things that made gold money for thousands of years, but it has this extra property that I can transmit it to anyone on Earth as easily as sending an email. And I think I realized very quickly that was a very powerful thing.
Yeah, that's really a foundational change in how we interact with money. And in this article, I think it has been quite some while. Was it 2020, 2019? Like it has
The
been
article
like,
was written in 2017, but it was published early 2018.
oh yeah, like so it's quite some time, and it's crazy to think about what happened till then. We were 2018, we were at like, I don't know, 10,000, 5,000, something like that. Now we're at 100K. Just in the last year, I actually looked it up before, we made around like 95% in the last 12 months, which is kind of a doubling. What's kind of your bullish case for Bitcoin in 2025? I mean, I guess the main thesis is the same, but the situation and the ecosystem that Bitcoin is now in is heavily changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most obvious and highest conviction bullish case for Bitcoin that I tell people about is that Bitcoin is just better than gold. And if you look at, the next 5, maybe 10 years, I think there's a very strong case to make that Bitcoin will surpass gold's market capitalization. So gold's market capitalization right now, I think, is about 20 trillion ballpark. Maybe it's a little more than that. And for Bitcoin to achieve the same market capitalization of gold, I think it could easily surpass it. But if it was to reach the same market capitalization of gold, Bitcoin would have a price of about $1 million per Bitcoin. So that's about a 10x from here. I don't think there's any asymmetric bet like that on Earth. A 10x with a very compelling case that this is significantly superior to gold as a store of value. It's not whether there's a debate around whether it's superior to gold as a store of value. It's merely a question of, is there enough people who understand that? It's just a question of the understanding spreading out into the financial markets, because as people think about this, it becomes clearer and clearer. This is significantly superior to gold. So to me, that's the most obvious bullish case. The long-term big bull case for Bitcoin is it becomes the global reserve currency. It replaces the dollar as the reserve currency, and the nation states are holding Bitcoin in reserve. And that's actually a discussion which is happening seriously now, which is, to me, that's crazy. It's happening so quickly, this discussion. Then you're talking about Bitcoin being, tens of millions of dollars. But I like to think on a kind of shorter term horizon, 5 to 10 years. Bitcoin becoming a reserve currency to me is a multi-decade process. That could be 20, 30 years into the future. So I think institutions are starting to see this. This is a compelling narrative that people are beginning to adopt. It was not, interestingly, this was not a very strong narrative when I first started writing the article. There was a lot of confusion about what Bitcoin was in 2017. There were a lot of people during the so-called block size wars who were arguing that Bitcoin was more like a decentralized PayPal or Visa or something like that. It was a payment system. It wasn't like a store of value. It wasn't like a base money. But I think the narrative around Bitcoin being a superior store of value has really become entrenched now. And I think the institutions, financial institutions, have really begun to subscribe to that. So you see BlackRock and Fidelity and these big financial players start offering Bitcoin as a product in the same way they offer gold through the ETF, the gold ETF as a product. So I think that adoption cycle has only just begun. It's starting to play out. If you look at gold's ETF when it was launched in 2004, it created a 4 or 5 year bull market in gold. Gold went up, I think about 4 or 5x on a big base. Gold was already worth trillions of dollars, and it went up 4 or 5x in about 5 years. I think something like that will happen to Bitcoin over the next 5 years.
It's really interesting. This shift in focus of store of value, is that like a natural good thing, or I rarely do that, but we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest without knowing the previous guest. But this end routine question suits so nicely in this discussion that I want to pull it forward. And the previous guest asked you the question: do you think the governments will try to keep Bitcoin as a store of value and kind of make it very hard to use it as a store, as a medium of exchange, to keep kind of printing money and just have Bitcoin as an asset, not just as and not also as a currency? Or do you think that store of value is kind of just a Trojan horse for medium of exchange to being adopted eventually?
I think the way I describe it in my book is that money goes through an evolution. No money starts out as a medium of exchange. It has to first be used as a store of value first. And this is what happened with gold. Gold was firstly, it was a collectible. It was just a shiny rock that people picked up and then they thought it was cool. And then as more people started doing that, it slowly but surely became a store of value because people realized other people value it. So it's good for me to keep some savings in it, and it's good. I can trade it if I need to. Once it's widely established as a store of value, then it becomes suitable as a medium of exchange, because when everyone values it, then things start getting priced in terms of it. You say, this loaf of bread is a certain number of ounces of gold, or this cow is a certain number of ounces of gold. Money has to go through this evolution. And one of the big confusions, I think, in the early days of Bitcoin was people thought that money is defined as a medium of exchange. So that's what Bitcoin needs to be first. And they started trying to get merchants to adopt it and things like that. And when you think about it, it doesn't really make any sense. Like, merchant adoption won't happen until there are enough people who own Bitcoin. Because if you're a merchant or a baker, for instance, why would you go to the extra mental overhead of accepting Bitcoin when only, 1% or less than 1% of your clients actually have any Bitcoin? And on the other side, the people who are holding Bitcoin, why would you spend your Bitcoin when it can go up, so much in value in a short period of time? And this lesson is learned by many early Bitcoiners, like the famous story of the pizzas, right? Two pizzas being sold for 10,000 Bitcoin. You'd much rather have the 10,000 Bitcoin now. And there are many people who remember from the early days, I wish I hadn't sold my Bitcoin and bought a pair of socks or something like that. I wish I just kept it. And you start to understand that. And then you realize this is a really good store of value. Eventually, once everyone owns it, that increase in value will plateau, right? The reason Bitcoin is going up in value is because more and more people are adopting it as a form of savings. But eventually, there's a finite number of humans. Eventually, everyone will have some Bitcoin. Then you won't see the 20 or 30% on average per year that Bitcoin is going up. It will shrink. The amount Bitcoin will go up in value per year will shrink to the level of productivity of society, the productivity gains. So it might shrink down to, say, 3 to 5%, because that's what global GDP productivity is. And then Bitcoin becomes suitable as a store of value. As a medium of exchange, because one of the big reasons that people don't use it as a medium of exchange is there's an opportunity cost. If you relinquish some Bitcoin, then you've relinquished the upside of it increasing in value. The other reason that Bitcoin is not used as a medium of exchange is, as you say, Robin, that governments have made it more difficult by creating laws around taxation. And every time you buy something with Bitcoin, you have to keep track of it, and that's really painful. Like, I don't want to have to create a spreadsheet every time I buy a spreadsheet entry every time I buy a coffee, so that when at the end of the year I have to pay taxes on that. Like, the mental overhead for doing that is so high, and it's such a big burden for people using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. Um, they are talking about, in the US at least, creating a de minimis exemption, which means that any purchase under $300 would be tax free. That helps a little bit. It means that for small purchases, for things like coffee, you can spend your Bitcoin without any tax impact. Nation states don't want to lose the sovereign power of controlling money. So I think, while they may adopt Bitcoin as a store of value, I think they will continue to make it hard to use it as a medium of exchange, because they want that control. The two main sovereign powers of any nation state is the army, controlling the military, and the other sovereign power is control over monetary policy. Nation states do not want to give those up, and they won't give them up easily.
Yeah, it's really hard. How do you look actually at once you say, like, we don't want to give up our Bitcoin, and there are some lunatics like me that are all in Bitcoin and don't have anything else. You at some point you come to the decision of either I sell some because I need something, or like they're just like when you earn it, you are either way forced to sell it, or you borrow against it. How do you look at that new trend of like now with treasury companies, leverage and fiat debt, and this financial engineering on top of Bitcoin seems to be extremely popular? How do you look at that? Is this like something that makes sense in this phase of store of value, because we are in the beginning phases of this store of value phase, or is it maybe even dangerous?
I think this is part of the process of financializing Bitcoin. You'll have a new financial system that's built on top of Bitcoin, and these products, like being able to borrow against your Bitcoin, or to loan your Bitcoin, or to do options trading, all of this is part of the financialization of Bitcoin. And I think that's normal, and it's healthy. I would caution, your listeners, that there are risks of borrowing against Bitcoin. Borrowing against assets is something that wealthy people have done for a long time, because it's a very tax efficient way of being able to spend money. So you have, say, 1 or 2 Bitcoin, you borrow against it and you use it to fund your lifestyle. And then you pay that loan back slowly over time. But at the same time, Bitcoin is appreciating in value. If the term of the loan is long enough, you should be okay. But there is a little bit of danger, because if Bitcoin drops by 50%, and that's possible, right? It could drop by 50%. Then you could get margin called, and then you have to post more collateral. You have to post more Bitcoin. So there's more stress involved. I think the way you suggested it is actually the safer way of doing it. If you are so all in on Bitcoin that that's all of the savings that you have, it's okay to sell a little bit to fund your lifestyle. I think that's totally fine. Regarding treasury companies, I think that's also part of the financialization of Bitcoin. But I also think this is going to be a huge bubble. I think it's already showing signs of being a huge bubble. And I think that there's no rational reason why these treasury companies should trade at a premium to their assets. It doesn't make sense. One reason they might trade at a premium is because there's trapped capital. That is capital that wants to get exposure to Bitcoin but doesn't have an easy, direct way of getting into Bitcoin. And so what that capital will do is, so you could have hedge funds in Europe, they may not be able to buy, for instance, IBIT, which is the most direct ETF. I think in Europe you can't buy IBIT, but you can buy MicroStrategy. And so there are funds, I think, that want to get Bitcoin exposure, and so the way they do it is through MicroStrategy. But eventually there will be access, I assume, in Europe to have like Bitcoin ETFs and ways of getting direct exposure to Bitcoin. And then the premium on these treasury companies will come down. And eventually the premium could go negative. There's nothing that says that these premiums have to be above 1. And the only way that these companies are able to accumulate more Bitcoin is because they have a premium. And so what they'll do is they'll issue more shares. They keep issuing more shares and using that to buy more Bitcoin. But eventually the market will say, there's no reason why you should have a premium to your assets. And that premium can turn into a discount. This has happened in the past. MicroStrategy has traded at a discount, and then they can't do that anymore. They can't sell shares to buy more Bitcoin. So, and actually then they will face pressure from shareholders who will say, your shares are trading at a discount to the value of your assets. And as a shareholder, I want you to make my share price go up. I want you to sell the assets and buy the share price. Now, Michael Saylor has said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hold Bitcoin. But I think other companies, David Bailey of the Nakamoto, I think it's called, his company's Treasury company is called Nakamoto or something like that. He has said if this company trades at a discount to its underlying value, he will sell Bitcoin and buy shares back. And so what you could have in the future is you could have this kind of spiral where these companies start trading at a discount to their NAV. So then they sell the Bitcoin on their balance sheet and use it to buy shares. But because they're selling Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin goes down, and that causes the share price to go down even more because people get scared that, hey, the only value here is the Bitcoin. And so you can get into this spiral effect where they're trying to prop up their share price by selling Bitcoin, but that's making the share price go down even faster. So I do worry a little bit that these companies, I'm less worried if a company is creating real value and using that to buy Bitcoin. Like they're building some product and they're using the profit and putting it in Bitcoin. But if the only thing they're doing is financial engineering, selling their shares to use it to buy more Bitcoin, that's not a sustainable thing in the long term. It's not possible to have this, go on forever, because eventually, I mean, there is no more Bitcoin. You can't keep buying. MicroStrategy can't keep buying more Bitcoin. Eventually, there's a limit. There's 21 million Bitcoin. They can't get more Bitcoin. So eventually, the market is going to say this doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't be trading at a premium to NAV, and then this will all end. And I'm worried that when it ends, it's going to kind of be a bubble that explodes, and that will be the end of the next cycle. You can look this video up when we're in the next bear market. And the reason we're in that bear market is treasury companies and them selling their Bitcoin to keep their share price high. This is the prediction that's going to happen.
I look at it the same way. When I think about what can trigger a bear market, it's people are over leveraging themselves with borrowing against it, and because I just had the podcast before with Sinan. He talked about that hero concept, that there's a few people that do the leverage early on when the market is low, then they make a bunch of money going up, then they coach other people how to do that, but they are the late majority, and then they do it at a point where it does not make sense anymore to do those things. And a similar thing I feel like happens with Bitcoin treasury companies, and the difference between a Bitcoin treasury company that is just a Bitcoin treasury company and a Bitcoin treasury company that does a great business and just happens to save their value in Bitcoin. Like, there's a huge difference. The one thing is providing real value and saving in sound money. Like, that's good. The other thing is just trying to financial engineer more money out of thin air, basically.
Yeah,
and I think that's really important, that difference there. The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watch watches from CoinVigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing CoinVigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. And we have right now a summer sale going on for 15% off. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today for $186. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need.
And it's also scary that people are sort of copycatting this, and that there are so many companies now trying to do this. That is going to mean that the premium comes down on all of them. And it reminds me, I don't know if you remember, there's a similar thing that happened in the last cycle with GBTC, where GBTC was the easiest way to get access to Bitcoin for a long time. And so it traded at this huge premium to its underlying asset value. But I think it was February 2021 when that premium went down to zero, and then it went negative, and then it went very negative. I mean, for a while, GBTC was trading at 50% discount to its asset value. And when that premium went to zero and started becoming a discount, that was the peak of the bull market. That was the sign that the bull market was over. So I think the sign that this bull market will be over is when MicroStrategy no longer trades at a premium to its net asset value. When that happens, that'll be a big warning sign. Like, this bull market is probably at an end.
Do you think strategy specific is also in danger, or is it more the copycats that came later in the game?
I think the copycats are in more danger, but I think MicroStrategy is in danger just from the reflection of what will happen to those other companies, because as it becomes harder for them to do what strategy has done, they will start getting I think they'll start getting huge discounts. I think some of these treasury companies there'll just be such a flood of these companies that some of them will come to market and already be trading at a discount to the net asset value, and then they just can't do anything. They can't issue more shares. They can't issue debt. No one wants to touch them. And then the stock will crater. And then I think it'll have this ripple effect on all of the companies in the space. And I think MicroStrategy will be affected by it too.
There are other dangers that I sometimes see. The one thing is that people are really focused on the price going up, and those people are usually people that previous cycles bought altcoins. Now the cycle seems to be like treasury companies or leverage, or just put it on an IOU and then make some financial things with that. And I see a lot of people hyping that up, that just holding and Bitcoin IOU, no matter what that is and borrowing against it, or like a treasury company. I just summarize that as an IOU, and they're no longer interested in holding the real thing, like Bitcoin in self-custody. And another thing that I see as a lesser danger, but I'm also curious on what you think, because you also lived through the block size war, internal wars like the Bitcoin core discussion that we just heard with Bitcoin knots and the op return limit. How do you look at those kind of more fundamental dangers directly to Bitcoin, and not just to like treasury companies?
Yeah, the risk profile of Bitcoin has changed dramatically in the last even 2 years. It's really shifted a lot. I think 2 years ago, I would have said the biggest danger to Bitcoin is a nation state attack. And I thought it was an open question whether Bitcoin would get enough adoption that it became politically infeasible for democratic nations to kind of go after Bitcoin. And I think that's happened. You know, with the United States, the last presidential election, I think it became clear that Bitcoin has political capture. So that main risk, I think, is gone. I think the bigger risk now to Bitcoin is kind of what you mentioned. I think protocol risk. There is certainly a protocol risk with quantum computing. It's unclear what the timeline for quantum computing is. There's such a wide spectrum of views on whether quantum computers will be able to break the encryption in Bitcoin in 5 years, or maybe it's 20 years. But the thing is, the market will price it in well before it actually happens. Like, if it's possible, if we knew for certain that it would be possible to break the encryption in Bitcoin in 5 years, the market would already be pricing that in. It would already be scary. And the really scary thing is not so much that is there any solution. There is solutions. There is quantum resistant encryption. The real danger is getting consensus around it, a consensus around providing a solution to the risks of quantum computing. And because Bitcoin's decentralized nature, it's very, very hard to get consensus. Like, even on this kind of op return debate, it was very contentious, right? Bitcoin has moved towards becoming almost fully ossified, where it's very, very hard to change. And that, for the most part, is a very, very good thing. You don't want Bitcoin to be easy to change, because if it's easy to change, then it's like Ethereum. It's no different to a central banking system, except that the central bankers and economists are replaced by developers. It's just a sort of centralized system with a small handful of people who control it. But if it's really hard to change or impossible to change, then you have true decentralization. But there is a risk. Quantum computing, if we don't have a solution to that, quantum computing could eventually break Bitcoin. And that's kind of an extreme emergency situation where the market will be looking at that. And I view that, in my opinion, as the only real meaningful risk to Bitcoin going forward, is quantum computing, and whether or not we can get consensus on a solution for that.
So kind of we have a solution for it, but consensus is not building because Bitcoiners are fighting too much on how we should implement things.
Yeah, I mean, some of the questions around this are actually very difficult to answer, because there are a lot of coins out there which are not quantum resistant, that are in addresses where the public key has been revealed. And any address which has Bitcoin with a public key revealed, a quantum computer can sort of steal that Bitcoin. It can figure out the private key to those public keys. And there's Satoshi's coins all have the public key revealed. So the question is, do you destroy those Bitcoins? Do you destroy the Bitcoins who have public key revealed, or make a consensus change to the protocol that says that any Bitcoin with a revealed public key is dead? That could potentially destroy live Bitcoins that are controlled. Now everyone thinks that, like, for instance, my first 5 Bitcoins, we talked about them. Those are actually dead because the private key for those Bitcoins is gone. And in that case, the public key is not revealed. But imagine that the public key of those Bitcoins had been revealed. Should you destroy those Bitcoins? Like, how do you know they're dead? There were Bitcoins that were mined in 2011 that just moved, just a few days ago. I think it was something like 80,000 Bitcoin have moved in the last few days. So this is, I think, one of the difficult questions around getting consensus on a quantum computing solution is, what do you do with the Bitcoins that are vulnerable? Do you create some timeline and say, hey, we're going to create a change to Bitcoin that's quantum resistant, and you have a window of time, maybe 2 years, to move your coins, to make those coins quantum resistant. Otherwise, your Bitcoin are dead. I think that's going to be a very, very lively debate. And I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of risk around getting consensus around that. And if you can't get consensus, then you get the worst case solution where all of those coins are vulnerable and they can be stolen and spent. And when you're talking millions and millions of coins, it effectively destroys Bitcoin. It makes the protocol very, very vulnerable.
It's a good point. Yeah. I actually haven't thought about the implications. Like, my thesis is always, if something is life-threatening to Bitcoin, the Bitcoin community will come together and figure out a solution. That's kind of like, I do think so, but it's more complicated than that in reality. And humans are emotional creatures. Humans are not perfect robots that always act logical. So yeah, that will be a fun time. I mean, in Bitcoin, it's always a fun time since 16 years.
Well, there's an economic incentive to try and find a solution. Everyone has the same. Anyone who owns Bitcoin has the same economic incentive to try and find a solution. But you can see, even with this really minor matters, it's hard to find consensus, right, on op return. And now you have this division in the community where the developers are like, we should do this, we should adopt this change. But a lot of owners say, no, I don't want you to do that because I don't want so much spam on the blockchain. And the question is, who has the power? Do developers? If developers have the power to do whatever they want, then Bitcoin has no value. Then those developers are the central bankers. And that's why I think a lot of people pushed back on this change and said, we don't want this change, because does it actually solve any problem? And if it doesn't solve a really critical problem for Bitcoin, why change Bitcoin at all? We should be trying to move towards Bitcoin not changing, because our trust in this 21 million supply cap, which is where Bitcoin really gets its value from, is really based on the idea that Bitcoin is almost impossible to change. If you can make a change to it, then you're putting at risk people's confidence in that supply cap.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's like, if it, I think it will never be able to I think there's never consensus that we increase the supply cap. I think that will be, I cannot even imagine that being the case at all. But once we open the Pandora and there's like a central group that all of a sudden has some authority on, like, hey, let's do this, and people just accept that and don't push back, then where's the limit? Like, where do you stop? The same discussion was with block size war, where, like, okay, only a small change and increasing to the block size, but if we increase it once, it's a danger that maybe we increase it the next year again and the next year again, and all of a sudden it's too big for normal people to run their own node. So even like small changes can make some danger, I guess, in that sense.
And it's not just theoretical, I should say. There's been discussions. I mean, Peter Todd has talked about adding a tail emission to Bitcoin. So there's always some inflation in Bitcoin, no matter what. Maybe he wants it to be small, but his reason is that to secure the network, you need some amount of inflation permanently in Bitcoin. That if Bitcoin's supply is truly capped, then Bitcoin cannot be secure, because he does not believe that there is enough incentive from transaction fees to secure the network. There are people who genuinely believe that and who believe that Bitcoin should be changed. So, but by allowing Bitcoin to be changed for small things, you're kind of opening the window for people like that to come in and say, hey, this is why don't we change the supply cap? We only want a little bit of inflation, and we have a good reason. We want to secure the network. And then other people will come in and say, well, maybe we should have even more inflation because it's good for the economy. So you really have to be careful. Like when the door is opened a crack and someone can get their foot in the door, then the door can open really wide. And I'll give an example that in the US, they created the income tax in 1913, and it was a tax of 1% of income, and it only applied to a small handful of people in the US. And they said, this is just a tax on the richest of rich people. That's what it's going to be. And now is not 1%, it's 37%, and it applies to everyone. And people at the time warned about that. You are opening the door. Once you open the door, then all hell will pour forth. So I'm very, very cautious about any changes being made to Bitcoin. The only change that I think is warranted to be made to Bitcoin is something that protects Bitcoin from quantum computing.
I think I found quickly the chart of that because I've seen that before. This one where the income tax all of a sudden like starts and gets bigger, and then they get a bigger and bigger part of the federal revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. I want to touch on something that I think I heard you talk about it, the kind of the moral impact that Bitcoin has on Bitcoiners. If I remember correctly, I think this was from you. How do you see, you've seen a lot of, you've seen it on yourself, and you've seen it probably from a lot of Bitcoiners over the time that you've known before, and then they adopted Bitcoin. What do you think is the impact outside of they're getting more money when they adopt Bitcoin?
I've seen a transformation in so many people, enough that I know it's not a coincidence, that it extends people's time horizon. They're no longer saving in something that's a melting ice cube. When you save in fiat currency, the value slowly dissipates over time. Well, sometimes it dissipates very quickly. And that creates an incentive, even if people don't really understand it, creates an incentive to go out and spend more money or to try and invest or gamble. Because if you don't do that, the value that you have earned through hard work sort of disappears over time. When people start saving in Bitcoin and they realize, hey, this is a finite thing, and it gets adopted by more people, its value goes up, they start thinking more about savings, and they become more frugal, and they think, maybe I can defer some consumption in the present to stack more Bitcoin because I know it's going to go up in value. Uh, and I've seen that transformation happen with so many people. And when they start thinking more about savings, they become more frugal, they become more future oriented. And it seems, my experience, it seems to change people's value systems. It changes you internally. And I've seen people become more moral because of this. It seems like a really strange thing, like people becoming more frugal and more future oriented and wanting to save more money. It's strange to think, but I've seen that transform people into becoming more moral and thinking about other things in their future, like, now maybe I can have a family. Now maybe I want to have kids because I can afford to have kids. I've seen that happen many, many times, and I think there is something to it that Bitcoin can transform people to become more moral people.
There's some aspect that it gives us hope and strength, because like a foundational thing is slowly getting fixed. Like if your excess cash per month is like 200 euros or dollars, and you always saved it in euros and dollars, your foundation is always slipping away. But what if you put that in Bitcoin? Your foundation all of a sudden gets bigger and bigger. And if you have done like 100 euros, 200 euros per month the past 5-6 years, you're doing it immensely good. If you've never touched that stack, you have a really great stack already. I've not done the math, but I imagine it's a really, really good stack. 5 years DCing every month, like $200 into Bitcoin. And this can really empower someone to have a moral compass and to have something. I do think every community, every society has its assholes and has its good people. But I found in Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin community, there is an overproportional amount of really generous and nice and moral people that just like to give to and provide for humanity and for the community.
Mm-hmm. And I think one other thing that has brought people together with Bitcoin is that it seems to me there's a shared common interest in human freedom, because Bitcoin is a technology that promotes human freedom. And even if people don't have the exact same interests, I've seen people from very different backgrounds. So people who are interested in homeschooling, or people who are interested in their health. So they're interested in organic food that hasn't been processed with chemicals and doesn't have pesticides in it. And so they really care about the government getting out of, creating food. In the US, there's this entire food industrial complex of these big companies creating this really toxic food that people eat. Or people like MMA fighters, they seem to be really a great community of Bitcoin because they really value the freedom to pursue their skill, which is fighting. And, a lot of governments have made it difficult or banned their profession. And so they have this innate love of freedom. And so they came to Bitcoin from that direction. So I've seen people come to Bitcoin from all of these different directions, but the common theme seems to be people who value human freedom.
I do agree with that. I love that aspect about Bitcoin, and I've interviewed now a little bit over 500 Bitcoiners, and with almost all of them, I can agree. That's great. I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
From me, what can you learn from me about the world? That's a tough question. I have not given that. I have so many questions about Bitcoin, but no, that's a really interesting question. I really think I have 4 children, and I think having kids is one of the greatest blessings that anyone can have in their life. And so I think we're living in a world where people in Western countries are forsaking having children. They're forsaking the most meaningful thing that they can do in their life. And I think focusing on having a family, building a family, is such a huge blessing that people should consider. For the vast majority of people, the most important thing that they'll ever do in their life is their kids. I mean, there are a few exceptions in history, Albert Einstein or Isaac Newton. They'll do something that's so important that all humanity will benefit. But for the most part, I think the biggest contribution we can make to this world is the kids we bring into this world, and raising them well and giving them good values. So I think I think one reason people are choosing not to have families is it seems so expensive, because we're in this fiat world now, and the current generation is the first generation in maybe 200 years that doesn't have the expectation that they'll live a better life than their parents, which is really sad. But Bitcoin gives you the ability to have that again, and I think if you can feel the sense that your savings will be protected and grow in value over time, maybe you'll have the optimism to think, hey, maybe I can have a family. Maybe I can afford to do that, and I can find a good partner, and we can raise kids who have good values. I think everyone should aspire to that.
I love that. And I've seen I've seen a tremendous amount of kids in the Bitcoin community. I've not seen any studies on that, but I would guess if you make and kind of a study on like how many kids Bitcoiners have on average, it's a lot more than the average human out there. There's a lot of kids in like the Bitcoiners are really passionate about that. I haven't. There are not a lot of Bitcoiners that don't have kids. I mean, Michael Saylor is one famous example, but he's one of the few that don't have kids.
Right. And then on the other end, you have someone like Jimmy Song who has like 6 kids.
I cannot think about his name. He was on my podcast from Sat Saver, and he has 12 kids.
Wow.
And I saw him with his kids in Bitcoin Vegas, and it was like, how can you keep track of all of them? You have to lose 1 or 2 in their travels.
Yeah. The cool thing about having so many kids is wherever you go, you bring the party, and you don't need there to be a party. You are the party.
At that point, you are the party. You are a football team at that point. Thank you so much, Vijay, for being on and being such a great guest today. Before I let you go, we usually have an end routine, but we did it in the middle of the episode today because I thought it was so suiting. But before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. I'm real_Vijay, REAL_VIJAY at Twitter. That's the best place to find me. And my DMs are open. I respond to people. If anyone wants to send me a message, I love talking about Bitcoin.
Awesome. And I'm curious how long Twitter will, like the name Twitter instead of X, will still be around.
I can't help it. I'm one of these people who used it from 2009, so I'm never going to be able to give it up. I'm gonna call it Twitter probably forever. It's like an accent. I have an Australian accent. I live in the US. I've been here for 25 years, but I haven't lost my Australian accent. And I think I'm never going to lose it. So I feel like calling it Twitter is the same thing. It's going to be Twitter for me forever.
I feel the same way. It's weird to say X. Like I'm on X. Like it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't sound as cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Vijay, for being on, and thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.